Gotcha.
An email, like forward the one I sent to the members.
Yeah, that'll be great. Yeah, thanks, Sean. All righty. Welcome, everybody. This is the City Council workshop for November 15th, 2022 for the City of Bonnie Lake. Let's please rise for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Mayor McCullough.
I am here.
Deputy Mayor Carter.
Here.
Councilmember Baldwin. Here. Councilmember Evans.
Here.
Councilmember Fullerton.
Here.
Councilmember McClymans.
Here.
Councilmember Swatman.
Present.
And Councilmember Watson.
Here. Oh, Madam Clerk, you have a different voice. Why? I didn't understand.
I'm working remote tonight.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All righty. We have a presentation on the FCS Group Water Rate Study. Ms. Ryerson, the floor is yours.
Great. I'm going to introduce Chris Gonzalez from FCS. He'll be talking about the rate study, the first portion of the rate study, which is to come up with the rates. The structure will be discussed at another meeting. We talked about getting rid of possibly summer rates, the tiers, that sort of thing. So that'll be another meeting. This one's just for the actual rates of the SDCs, the water, the sewer, and the storm. He will be here to take questions, but please realize that we don't expect to solve all these problems tonight. This will be an ongoing discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
All right, thank you. Good evening, council, everyone in attendance. Oh, okay. F50. If you were to me to find that. All right. I clicked the mouse. Okay, I just rolled the wheel. Okay. All right, so I thought I would start out with a brief overview of the rate study methodology, get into the SDC update a bit, and then talk about the financial plans, which are really focusing on how much revenue rates are generating, or how much they need to generate to cover your costs. We'll go over some of the assumptions and the findings, and then kind of talk about next steps. Feel free to interrupt if you have any questions as we go along, just to keep it topical as we're in the various stages of the presentation. So as I was just saying, the typical comprehensive rate study has three phases. The first phase is the revenue requirement analysis or financial plan. That phase involves forecasting costs and revenues, overlaying a framework of policies, and then determining how much rates need to generate to cover those costs. The second phase is the cost of service analysis, which involves allocating cost to customer classes, also looking at the different functions of service and trying to figure out who is contributing to the cost of the system and making sure that they are paying for an equitable share of costs. And then the final phase is designing rates, a series of fixed and variable charges that recover the amount targeted from each customer class. So first we'll get into the SDC update. SDC is a connection charge that development pays as an equitable contribution toward the cost of system infrastructure. It's based on the cost of existing assets and future projects. Though cost recovery is the goal more so than revenue generation, it does provide a source of funding to offset capital project costs and debt service that rates would otherwise have to fund. And so the general methodology, you can see in that diagram there, is we look at the cost of the existing system plus the cost of the future capital projects, and then we divide that over existing and added capacity, equivalent residential units, however that's defined for each utility. So we'll get more into the steps. We look at defining the cost of the existing system, computing interest allowed under statute, looking at the capital improvement plan and integrating that in, and then defining the applicable system capacity. So Really, to summarize the existing cost basis, we start out with an inventory of asset costs as of the end of 2021. Finance maintains that and gave that to us. We adjust for interest accrued. We take out assets that were funded by developers or grants that were identified as being funded externally. We also deduct net outstanding debt principal to recognize that when a connection occurs to the system and the customer becomes a ratepayer, they'll pay for their share of those assets through the debt service included in their rates. Then the final adjustment there, we look at the capital improvement plan, and that's really the basis for the future cost basis that you see up in the table above. We then take out, there are some projects that replace existing assets, and so we have a couple of options on how to deal with that and avoid double charging customers for their for an asset and its replacement at the same time. The first option would be to just leave out the future replacement projects. The second option, which is what we've done in these analyses, is we include the future replacement project cost, but then we adjust the existing asset inventory to reflect the estimated cost of the asset being retired. So we're really trying to avoid double charging for things in the calculation. And so you can see up there for the water SDC calculation, we've separated that into three components: supply, fire, and other. The supply component focuses specifically on the cost of Tacoma Supply, is what would be made available to growth. So that's why we call that out separately. The fire component recognizes that different customer classes have different fire flow requirements, and they contribute differently to the oversizing of facilities to provide fire flow. And so that varies by class. And then the other category is basically everything else, and that should conceptually be the same for all new connections. And so and we add those components together, and we get a charge of about $5,300, which is fairly low compared to the existing charge. And the key driver behind that reduction is we worked with staff and the engineering consultant to estimate how many ERUs, equivalent residential units, the system can serve. And so we've integrated that and kind of sharpened the pencil on that number. And so we have a bigger denominator, and so that's why we're ending up with a lower charge, as opposed to looking at a system plan and say this is the 20-year forecast of ERUs. Ultimately, if the system, as it stands with the CIP, if they can serve more than just the 20-year forecast, we want to account for that, and that's what we're doing here.
What's the interest rate you used on the futures cost?
The interest, there was no interest on the future.
I'm sorry, not interest.
Inflation?
Inflation, yeah.
We back inflation out of the future cost basis, just recognizing we don't want to include inflation and then have index to inflation and sort of double counting inflation. So typically, when we compute SDCs, we use current dollar estimates on the project.
Okay.
So how did you get to 1390 again on that first column, supply?
So effectively, it's the existing asset inventory that is allocable to Tacoma Supply. It's about $18.5 million, if I'm reading that correctly. And then we look at the system capacity and residential equivalents, and that is only the growth portion, because what we're basically saying, we're leaving out the well-supplied facilities that are serving existing customers. So that component is divided only by growth in residential equivalents. And then for the others, for fire, we're looking at a weighted average based on fire flow requirements. So single family is assigned 1,000 gallons per minute, multifamily and commercial 2,500 gallons per minute, and then industrial 3,500 gallons per minute. So that's why that number is higher. And then the other is total existing plus growth in residential equivalents.
How long have you guys been doing SDC pricing like this? I mean, well over 20 years?
Yes. The methodology is pretty standard. There are variations on the methodology. I mean, there are some that say, let's do a share of existing and then only the growth-related share of future. And
so right now we're projecting, but you have historical data. Has your historical data been accurate from 20 years ago to today?
Accurate in terms of
20 years ago, when you made this presentation to another city, where are they at today versus what you guys suggested?
Yes, and probably not. Just, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the existing asset inventory is accurate. I mean, as accurate as finance can make it, just in the accounting. The capital program is based on a system plan, or it's a capital plan that's built into the budget. And so we assume, based on the schedule, that those projects will get done. In practice, projects get pushed off and don't quite get done.
Just at a 40+% discount from what we're currently paying, I just want to make sure in 12, 15, 20 years from now, we're not finding ourselves in a situation where we shouldn't have done that as drastic as we did, not knowing what the future holds.
And so I think the biggest difference here is the denominator is bigger, because we're looking at how many, and really the goal behind this methodology is we say, let's look out as far as we can. Water sewer districts can't do this. They're limited to 10 years, but cities aren't. Look out as far as we can, and then making sure we're not double charging for a given asset, like over the life cycle of the system. And we say, what does that cost as best as we can quantify it, and then how many ERUs can that system serve? And so the goal is, once we have that dialed in, it shouldn't change that much. I mean, you add assets, things move from the CIP to the existing cost basis. We accrue interest over time up to 10 years, and that cycle continues. So there should be modest increases, but ideally we want to minimize the swings. Oh yeah, we're using a 20-year forecast now, and it's a different number this time. So really trying to use the best available information that we have.
What is the multiplier on the Tacoma supply that you're using to project out 20 years?
So the future cost basis of none of the CIP projects were specifically related to Tacoma supply as we had in the capital plan. So you'll notice the future cost basis under supply is 0. So it's really just the documented cost of the existing assets and investments made in Tacoma supply divided by future growth, and then getting that cost of $13.90 per residential equivalent for supply.
Is it safe to say that the Tacoma supply cost will go up?
That's a good question. It would depend on the capital plan. So if the city has to make additional investments in Tacoma supply, that number would go up.
Are we only responsible for the portions related to the area in which we supply?
Yes, no, those are investments made by the city in Tacoma supply. So it doesn't include anything beyond the city's share of that.
So if Tacoma supply does a bunch of upgrades out at Tahale, we're not being impacted by that supply increase.
They wouldn't unless they were saying Bonnie Lake, hey, give us X million dollars for that project. But if they're not, that wouldn't affect cost basis.
And what were the numbers we provided him? Were those the numbers from last year's budget or the one we just 2014?
Oh, no, the rates were from 2014, the 9,000. Is that what it said up there?
Yes, and I think that might have reflected an inflationary adjustment. I'm trying to remember the history. But I mean, the first project that I was involved with was 2017, and so that charge was already in place. But we did not increase it as a result of the last study, and then with the updated estimate of residential equivalent capacity, it's going down.
That doesn't answer your question, though, right? Sherry, you provided all of the most up-to-date costing on that. Is that last year's numbers? 21?
Yeah, he had 21 actuals, 22 estimates, I believe.
Yes, and then I think the most recent CIP was for the 23-24 budget. That would be what's in it.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was asking. Right. What CIP did you use?
The sewer STC component, we look at different costs that are embedded. There's a treatment component based on investments in capacity at the Sumner treatment plant. There's a conveyance charge based on the cost of city-funded mains, lift stations, and other infrastructure. One thing to note is the asset records that Sherry provided do not include any costs associated with mains acquired prior to 2009. So there's a decent hole in the costs that we are including here. suggests that the charge is conservatively low. Ultimately, we're looking at a cost basis of about $111 million up there, including about $72 million in existing assets and then about $39 million in anticipated future investments. Again, in 2022 dollars. So then looking at the system capacity and residential equivalents, that number is initially based on the general sewer plan's estimate of how many ERUs the system, or residential equivalents the system can serve. We adjusted that number to reflect the fact that once the city reaches 85% of the capacity, the city needs to start investing in expanding capacity. And since we're not including any of those project costs associated with expanding the capacity because they're not known, so the number we see there for residential equivalents is 85% of the amount specified in the system plan is being how many residential equivalents the system can serve. And because the system is constrained by capacity at the Sumner treatment plant to treat biochemical oxygen demand, or BOD. It's really limited by the strength of the wastewater. And say I was around 11,000 or so or residential equivalents.
What is the capacity right now that we're using?
Are you talking about overall plant capacity that we're using?
If 85% is 9,400, where are we at right now?
We're currently using approximately 57% of the capacity we have at the plant.
Okay, of our capacity, not the overall?
Correct. That would be overall plant capacity. We use slightly over half of the total capacity that plant is sized for treating.
And similarly, like what we do with beds for police, do we have a portion or a percentage that is ours? If they can hold 20,000, is that 11,159? Is that available to us?
It is. When the plant went through the expansion, that was part of the design, is that they were estimating based on future growth how much flow each city would provide. And then based on that, the waste strength, BOD, total suspended solids, and so on. And each city was allocated a certain capacity, both in volume and in these constituents in the wastewater.
And the 11,150.
Just knowing the capacity down there, and once we hit 85%, is it possible to grow that capacity at that current location?
There is currently room at the Sumner treatment plant for expansion. Yeah. Is that the question you're asking? Yeah.
And if not, I mean, it would probably be a lot more site new capacity somewhere else. And that's another reason why, if we don't know that cost, it's not defined at all. We don't want to sort of.
That's what I wanted to make sure, that once we hit 85 and we go, all right, need more. Oh, we've got to tunnel out to, some other location now or something. So, okay, thank you.
So we're at 50% of the 6.5 million gallons per day.
56, roughly, somewhere in there.
Okay.
So looking at all the math, we maximum justifiable SDC. Roughly 100. Went through the same process. What's the cost of the existing assets? What does the 23-24 budget CIP for stormwater SEC? Actually, when I say that, it's not just 23 and 24 expenditures. It's the full 60-year CIP. So we have our cost base $1 million. Denominator. Stormwater, it's a lot harder. How many meter equivalents do we have? And wastewater, we can say how many residential equivalents can we treat at the plant. For stormwater, it's trying to figure out, well, what would be the buildable land in theory, and kind of having to make guesses. So what we did was basically start out with what are the existing number of equivalent service units based on the rate structure. The annual revenue divided by our rate per ESU gets us the number of existing ESU by a year growth forecast to that to estimate the number of ESU. What we see here is 1665 compared to the 570, which has been in place adjusted annually for inflation. There would be a bit more of a jump in that chart.
So John, doesn't Jason have an estimate for what that growth is?
Hands report?
Yeah.
Yeah, you would have that.
Yeah. And did you use that?
I don't know that I was aware of that, so we could certainly follow back and make sure that our number is consistent. I mean, part of it is knowing what's buildable land and then what percentage of that is going to end up being impervious and then equating that to
Sure.
the ESUs. But we should at least talk about it.
What percentage of all of our stormwater actually ends up at the treatment facility versus a retention pond?
That's really unknown. One of the things that we've been doing is engaging with RH2 to put together an infiltration and inflow study that can quantify the amount of stormwater that's making its way into the sewer collection system. And we did complete that. I don't have the number in my head right now, but based off of that, then we are programming improvements in 23-24 to actually work on the sewer collection system to seal up those areas where that's being collected.
That collection, I don't want to say necessarily accidental. Not like in my neighborhood, everything goes towards a retention pond. And I know most of all the new development, that's probably the case. What areas in the city would be going south of or north of 410 that would likely be going into a sewer going to the treatment facility?
It depends. I mean, lots of time I&I is due to aging infrastructure. But you can have a brand new manhole and surface water can run off of it and into the manhole and collect and then go, enter the sewer collection system that way. So the reasons really vary. Largely, though, you're going to find I&I prevalent in areas where the infrastructure is older. You have mains that need to be replaced that may be cracked or something like that.
And that water is coming in.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
I had a question. I just want to make sure I'm doing the math correctly here. So I see that, it's 14 million, 6 million, 20 million, 12 million, correct?
That's 12,000.
Okay, 12,000.
Yeah, the ESUs is not in thousands, but just the dollars.
Okay, so I guess I'm just trying to figure out how the math.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what you would do is divide the 20.6 million by 12,417 to get your 1665.
Oh, okay, I got that. Okay.
Took me a minute too, but then when I saw
Oh my
dollar
goodness.
sign,
Really and truly, you have to speak in a way that our citizens will be able to understand. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm hearing everything that you're saying. I'm trying to track with you. I'm a fairly bright gal, and some of this is going a bit over my head. And so I think, yeah, it might be a good idea to really maybe, I don't know, explain it a little more clearly. And I think some of the times there's a lot of, SDC, ESU. It's a bit much as you're explaining, just so you know. Yeah.
So
I'd like to track with you, so.
So SDC, system development charge. And
Yep, look that up. Mm-hmm.
And then ESU is equivalent.
Yep, see that right there? Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else?
Not yet.
Well, so what you're trying to tell me by the parenthetical expression there is that your dollar values are K, right? So that's really not a dollar value. That's 14,482,000. So that's 14,482 K dollars.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's in thousands of dollars.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that parenthetical expression was supposed to be telling me with the 3 zeros. What?
The accountant's got to look crafty, right?
Yeah.
There's questions, yes.
Can I ask a question? Oh, can I ask a question?
Mayor?
Oh,
I'll wait till the end.
okay. Well, no, actually, if you don't mind introducing yourself for the record so that we'll know, but go ahead. Okay.
lot of this and the length of a basic question. Looking at that chart, 575.
So, development charge. This is the current charge has been in place since. So what happens is
This is based on, because it's an SDC, and I'm assuming that's for the one-time charges, things that happen just with new connections,
Yes.
right? Okay. And so the reason why you're calculating these kinds of things has everything to do with just future growth.
yes,
And that's just what we're looking at right now. And I'm sure there's other things you're going to show us.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, the purpose of this is to say what would the system development charges be to recover an equitable share of system costs from growth, and then assuming whatever decision you want to make with that. Not that we're making a decision tonight, but that will affect the rates because it affects the amount of money coming in the door to pay for capital projects.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So for the stormwater piece, though, the infrastructure requirements, if it's new construction, right, in stormwater areas, the builder is installing all the stormwater systems that I'm aware of.
So this would be net of anything funded by developers.
Yeah, but what would see what I'm saying is usually when you look at like a sewer or water infrastructure type SDC charge, you're talking about buying into the plant that's already there because the conveyance is there and all the appurtenances. With respect to stormwater, if I'm building my house or my whatever, I'm required to do that on site. I don't get to plug it into anything.
And I think that the stormwater system includes investments in system-wide stormwater management, like in public areas, so not just the on-site stuff. The on-site stuff that's not funded by the city is not.
Yeah, but see, that's kind of may not exactly be a financial question, right? Because see, when I build my house, I'm required to 100% take care of my stormwater on my site. So theoretically, there would be like zero impact me building my house to the area stormwater system, other than the public road that was created and stuff like that.
Yes. At the same time, the stormwater system provides general system benefit. So on public streets, public properties, and having to invest.
Yeah, but when I built my new house,
Yes.
I didn't affect that plant in any way, right?
I'm guessing probably not. Yeah.
So why am I having to pay for a system development charge when I didn't cause any effect?
Because you're buying into infrastructure that comprises the public's manages stormwater flows throughout this, not just private property.
Right. As long as you can tell that to the legal people, we're good.
Yes. Is there anything, Ryan, that you would add to that?
No, and obviously with stormwater, a big concern is water quality, and we all share in the water resources in the area. And continually, Kelly, you've mentioned, the idea of these unfunded mandates. Continually through our MPDES permitting, we are obligated to install and keep up a system that assures a certain water quality criteria or threshold for all of that runoff that comes from the city when it rains, and we all share in that cost. And so that is why we have a stormwater utility and enterprise fund. It's responsible for the upkeep of that entire system in order for us to stay in compliance with our regulations that were handed down through our MPDES permit.
Kind of a sideways story, but you guys think you can sell it?
Buying it, if you build a house, you don't have kids in the school district, you're still paying a school impact fee.
Of course, because that's a community kind of thing, right? Because there's the effect of the education and stuff on the society
Paying
that
a
you live
traffic
in.
impact fee too on roads that are already existing,
Well, for future improvements.
but not necessarily your road.
Someplace.
I just had one more question, thought. Okay, so then the 1665, just to make sure, you're saying that is what we need to then collect or have above even just the 571.
No, that is replacing the 570.
Okay.
So, yeah, I just showed.
Is there a way to go back to the other two,
Sure.
the sewage and the water? I just want to make sure.
Water goes down, sewer goes up $150.
Water goes
Water.
down from 9,095 per residential equivalent to 5,304 per residential.
Okay.
And
And then the next
yeah,
one.
sewer is currently 11,606, and that if you, and I guess the other thing I'll stress here is these are what we're calling the maximum justifiable charges. You don't have to do them. You shouldn't do anything above them. And in the case of the water system development charge, I think the evidence is showing you should reduce that. But so yeah, sewer going from 11,606 to 11,756. So that's an increase of like 150
Okay.
per
Thank you.
residential equivalent.
Okay.
And then stormwater, yeah, is going from 571 to 1665. So overall, if you add them up, the total charge payable will go down.
You're about $2,500 cheaper to build a house under this than you are today.
Yes.
About that, yeah.
And actually, I might have that on the next slide. So here is the SDC survey. And so we picked some communities that were of similar area and or size. And so right now the existing charges are near the top of the range, and in part that's the sewer SDC is relatively high compared to a lot of the other jurisdictions. Once we adjust for the updated charges, the net charge goes down by kind of roughly that $2,500 or $3,000 amount. And so I think the thing to note though is these are the current SDCs by all the jurisdictions. It doesn't account for any increases they may be planning for. And then the other disclaimer to give you about this comparison is, unlike rates, where if you don't set your rates to recover your costs, you spend your money and then you run out of money. For SDCs, there's nothing that says you have to update them at any frequency. I mean, some of these, might not have updated the charge for 10 years, and there's nothing really to force them to update it. It's just a matter of when they take a look at the charge. And all the systems are different in terms of the infrastructure that they need, requirements. So that's why there's a fair amount of variety here in the charges. But at the very least, you're within the range of what other jurisdictions charge.
Of course, that shows Sumner is, we go into the Sumner plant, right?
Yes.
Do you have any input on why Sumner's charge is listed there as only $5,100 as opposed to the proposal for us at 11?
Well, some of that is driven by the other infrastructure because there are two. There's a conveyance and a treatment component. I know talking to staff, I think there's a fair amount of topography in the city, so requiring additional pump stations, lift stations, and pump stations. I don't have the details of the Sumner charge right at hand, but
Thank you.
I would guess that's probably contributing to it.
I wonder if I can make a statement. Whoever's dinging, can we mute the phones?
That was me. I
okay.
fixed it.
Oh, okay. Thanks. And the second, why is Buckley $9,000 for stormwater?
I was pretty shocked by that. I don't know.
Huh.
I looked up their fee schedule and their rate is also relatively high. I mean, my guess is they have some considerable improvements to manage runoff, and it might be driven in part by snow melt off of.
Nice try.
I'm guessing on that one.
That was,
25 feet higher than us in elevation.
so I think they're relatively new, by the way, because I don't recall if they just did that,
I think they did in like the last
they
5 to
didn't.
7 years.
Yeah, so they were trying to recover a lot of costs there. So.
It might also be an issue of what they have to pay for themselves versus others to pay.
Mm-hmm.
That might also. In general, seeing the highest stormwater charges, typically there are local improvements that are necessary.
And we do have another question.
Very interesting. Like the gentleman. I'm not really buying into the issue of
actually like to see the next. Why is that big difference? Somewhere like that. Especially when it comes to elderly. Up on a hill, costs a lot of money.
Yeah, and let me be clear, this chart.
Hold on
Sorry.
for just a second. Two comments. One of them is that you are definitely not from this area. What part of, is it Ireland that you're from?
We get a lot of water in Scotland.
Oh, Scotland. Okay, no wonder we have this. Second thing being that particular issue that you're addressing right now, I've already addressed with our new city attorney about 2 hours ago, and yes, we are going to be looking. But there are no definite or final answers tonight. This is our initial presentation.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
What's that? So
Thank you for sharing that. And I would like to.
Sumner.
And my apologies for going across on the wrong side of the
yeah,
shore.
it's all sewer. Yeah.
So before, I mean, just to say very quickly, this charge is recovering capital costs. So the fact that there is electricity doesn't affect this because that's an operating cost and that's not built in. But this, my point in bringing that up was if you need pump stations to pump stuff up, there's capital investment in the structures to get the water or the wastewater. That being said, we can look into. I can look into Sumner, the details behind. I think I calculated that one a few years ago, so I can dig into specifically what's different. But some of them, we don't have details for it and don't know. We didn't do Buckley. Can't say why they at least stormwater charges. So, like I said, I think the infrastructure needs of each community are different, and they're also potentially a different life cycle. So if you have a system that has to do a bunch of capital projects or replace a bunch of stuff at way higher cost than the original is, that's going to potentially be reflected in their charge if they're up. So it's a complicated question, but I can at least see it in the same light.
Just if I could really quick, so before we leave that topic, just one item of note. I apologize in advance for my voice. One of the reasons, and we can vet this and then maybe report back, but I think one of the reasons why we see that big difference between the SDC for sewer and Bonnie Lake versus Sumner is not only in addition to the topography and the lift stations and all that kind of stuff, but the SDC being based on capital improvements and the fact that we share those costs with the city of Sumner. I think they're only incorporating in their share of the cost for capital improvements at the plant and not the 100% entire cost because we bear some of that cost. So that could be part of why you see that difference there. Sumner doesn't have near the amount of lift stations we do. So we have that cost plus our share of the capital at the plant, whereas Sumner, less lift stations, using that as an example, and a reduced cost for the treatment plant, capital cost.
There are also different variations on the methodology. Not everybody's doing the exact same methodology, so that might also be part of it. So, but yeah, we can circle back on that one.
Ryan, how many lift stations do we actually have in Bonnie Lake again?
26.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. And then how many do you estimate they have down in Sumner?
I think they have 5.
Just 5?
Yeah. It's a
because
small
we have
number.
to pump everything down and back up. Is that why we have so many, or is it just?
So depending upon where the lift station is located within the city limits, it has to pump. The topography varies, obviously. The long story short is that we can't flow the wastewater gravity from all areas of town. We can't just use gravity to deliver that wastewater. So we have these pump stations to collect it and then pump it over the hill, so to speak, to overcome the topography and get it to the next lift station or down the hill to Sumner.
Okay, thank you.
My question would be, why does have no non-applicable? Do they not get storms?
No, they don't have a stormwater SDC, which means if I know Bainbridge Island has a stormwater utility. I'm sure the others have something, but it's a policy choice whether they recover costs through an SDC. And they just.
So on this chart, I think one thing that would help me is, I'm trying to digest this chart and figure out where I would like Bonnie Lake in here. So, personally, I like Bonnie Lake to be down there by Puyallup. But it would be nice to know relative what the service what do you call them, RSEs?
Residential equivalents.
Yeah, residential equivalents are that are represented up there. And then, like you said, maybe the last time that was updated. If you have that data, that would be handy because, I don't know if Puyallup's way down there because they haven't done this in 5 years or 10 years, right?
Yeah.
Or, but I just look at that and go, wait a minute. I don't really want to compare to Sumner or Bainbridge or Enumclaw. Maybe Puyallup's a good comparison. So, and then I go, well, it's certainly where for my taxpayers' benefits, I'd like to be, right? So I'm trying to understand the data and the chart, and there's a lot of information there, but it's hard to get it normalized, right? Because it's not really apples everywhere on that chart. There's some oranges mixed in.
Oh, Councilmember Fullman.
If other cities don't have to have stormwater, then why do we?
Well, they
Policy that we can change.
they have stormwater utilities. The ratepayers pay for everything because they choose not to recover costs from growth. But I mean, it goes back to what Councilmember Swatman said. It's there's the intuitive understanding of what is a stormwater SDC recovering. It's not like you're connecting to a pipe like you do for water and sewer. And so, we have a policy decision. Do we recover the cost of the stormwater infrastructure that benefits the system through an SDC, or do we have ratepayers pay the whole thing? And that's the ones that don't have an SDC, they've made that choice. And so you could also make that choice, but then your stormwater rates are going to be higher because of it.
No, thank you.
Another question?
Yep. Councilmember Baldwin. Right here.
Go for it.
Um,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's all right. That's all right.
Studying chart.
So I guess with looking at Puyallup, the question then that I ask is, where is their wastewater treatment facility?
Right alongside 167, just down from the car dealership.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then if they are, because Puyallup is large. There's downtown Puyallup, there's South Hill. I'm assuming it services both, right? And I'm assuming they have multiple lift stations as well. If it's down below, they have people.
Pretty good, probably. I don't think they have a lot of.
I don't really know the particulars of their system, but the wastewater treatment facility is located at basically one of the low points in the city. So they do have the ability to take a lot of what's coming off the hill, and at least for some portion, they're utilizing gravity to get to the plant. But certainly, I'm sure they have lift
Talking
stations.
about sewage, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know the particulars of their system.
No one else has any more lift stations more than we do. Pierce County has. County has most. Well, we're second to them. Right.
Is there a way that with the Sumner facility, it does make sense to me, the cost difference now because of how many lift stations? It sounds like you're saying we are paying towards 100% of the lift stations, 26 as far as capital improvements are concerned. And then we also pay a portion of capital improvements at the main facility.
That's our.
Yeah. Is that? Yeah.
One down there. There's a big issue.
Is it not a possibility? Because, I think that there's, without us being a part of that system, they us as part of the system, that there could be, a different structure as far as how, put money into capital improvement, how much they do and how much we do. I just think, I don't know. I think that's
Well, yeah.
huge different cost.
The short answer to that is yes. There is a different way of doing it, and we are going to be starting the process on that here fairly quickly. Yes, we have a question in the back.
I just have a question.
And I'm sorry, could you introduce yourself for the record?
Gabby Robinson. I'm also a Guy Island. But it might be a dumb question. I don't have a ton of background.
No.
I'm sitting in on. But gravity for Puyallup, that also.
I believe their treatment facility is on the hill.
Well,
They said it's
By the car dealers.
what is Puyallup doing right?
Owning, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Johnson, but they own 100% of their wastewater treatment plant while we share and we sharing in an interlocal agreement that we are going to be busy to try to negotiate different terms with it, which is part of, I think, the major difference here.
Yeah, but still as a whole. That's like South Hill, downtown, like
Yeah, you're saying even if they're
right,
combined,
even if they are combined, if
Yeah.
you consider Sumner and Bonnie Lake together,
feels
like
significant.
Well, but it's not.
It's not.
And yeah, and it, yes.
but what I'm saying is like, why is such a well?
So that's part of it. So, I mean, so talking about the general methodology, we have a cost and we're dividing by a number of residential equivalents. And if they are of a larger scale and have many more residential equivalents, the charge there's economies of scale.
But I'm saying in my theory, I'm like, okay, combine Sumner, Bonnie Lake, and they're not separated.
Mm-hmm.
Would that theory?
So my guess is, I mean, if we were to just lump them together, it would
Yeah.
probably be an average, some kind of weighted average of the two charges you see there. Probably be somewhere between what we see for Sumner and what we see for Bonnie Lake.
And then would that be close?
Well, it would be higher than Sumner currently is and lower than Bonnie Lake currently is. So, yeah, and so part of it, and what I don't know is when Puyallup updated their charge. I mean, we don't do their SDCs, so I mean, figure it out. I mean, maybe going through like resolutions or ordinances to find when they last updated it, but I mean, otherwise, or maybe calling the city and seeing if they would explain when they did it, but we don't have a lot of knowledge. And I would say some utilities, they adjust their methodology to get a lower charge. They might adopt something less than the full charge. I mean,
That might not be.
correct. So
That goes back to the
It's a current number.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's what they're currently charging, but it's not necessarily based on current costs.
They could be going through the same thing, and in 6 months from now, their representative might say, "We're here now."
Mm-hmm.
So it might just be a timing.
And
issue, but I am looking up the full code of develop right now to find out.
in the meantime, Mr. Bunny, you had a question? Oh,
Yeah. So, yeah. So, well, one thing I do want to be clear. I mean, a low charge is not necessarily something to praise or condemn. I mean, the biggest thing is this is part of the cost recovery package, and the rest of it is the ratepayers. And so, if they have super low SDCs and their rates are high, is that a win or not? Well, it's a win for some, but not for others. So that's the main point I wanted to make on it. As far as the water change, I don't have the calculation for the 9,095. When I started doing work for Bonnie Lake, that's what it was, and it's been that way since 2014. The drop is attributable to the fact that we have our cost of the system, and that we have an estimate of how many residential equivalents, like basically equivalent single-family homes, the system can serve. And that information has been refined as a result of the 2017 water system plan that I think it was in progress during the last time we talked about SDCs. It has since been done. And so the estimated capacity of the system as a result of that went up. And so we have, even if the cost didn't change that much, dividing by a bigger number gives you a lower charge per number.
Puyallups was last updated in November of 2010.
Oh,
So it's almost 13 years
Yeah,
old.
so don't try to compete with them.
Well, oh, not at all.
So hold on to your hats.
So, I mean, without having all those other calculations, being able to compare the various pieces of the calculation directly, that was kind of what we were talking about, in that Bonnie Lake has 26 lift stations and other communities don't need that much. And so it's not the electricity cost or the ongoing operating cost, but, they had to spend, $3 million on this station, $5 million on that one, and all those investments add up.
Fine.
That's not factored in here. Because the law says that the city is allowed to establish a connection charge based on the cost of the system, not the value of the system. And so this is the documented cost of the system. If we were going to go value and depreciate, we should be looking at the replacement cost in current dollars net of depreciation, but we can't do that in this state. There's a case law against that.
Of course.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Ryerson.
For the sake of Mr. Gonzalez's time, this is just the SDC portion. We still have the rate study to go through. So
Yeah, and I would suggest that after everything is presented, we do an open house, invite the public to come out, ask all the questions, and maybe have Mr. Gonzalez back to a summarize thing after the council gets all of that information. So, because the questions we're hearing are great, but I would love to see the place filled up with a whole lot more, and do that after the fact.
I will say this is the first council meeting in quite some time that I've had this much of public engagement. So I appreciate it. Like, usually there's no one here or they come for something else and then they leave when we start talking about sewers. So thank you for the questions. All right, so we'll move on to the rate study if I slide in the right direction. All right, so the key assumptions here for annual cost inflation, I know CPI is going to look low to you. What I would emphasize is that this is basically inflation beyond the 23-24 budget. So staff has already factored in near-term expectations into those budget projections. And I mean, the state issues a forecast of Seattle CPI, Consumer Price Index.
Thank you.
And basically, they're showing it at like 2.5% per year or lower by 2025. So we're still a little conservative with that forecast. And then benefits costs, we've vetted with staff at 5% per year. And then construction costs, this is built into the CIP that staff developed, 4% per year. Our growth rates, we're assuming generally 0.5% per year, which for the water utility equates to 95 to 100 residential equivalents per year, 75 to 80 for the sewer system. So the sewer system is a little bit smaller than the water system. And then stormwater, it's 55 to 60. Understanding that the equivalent service units for stormwater are they're determined differently than the residential equivalents for water and sewer. For single-family homes, an equivalent service unit is 1 per single-family home, and then for others, it's based on impervious area divided by the unit that is defined in the code, like so many square feet of impervious area, which I don't have on the top of my head.
How are you getting the difference between the sewer and stormwater numbers for allocation?
For growth,
you would think if you're building something, sewer connection, have a stormwater connection.
Yes. So I mean, so what we did was we applied the 0.5% growth rate to all the utilities. And so, given the existing number of equivalent service units for stormwater, we estimate that by dividing the revenue by the rate per equivalent per ESU, and then we escalate that number by 0.5% per year, we get 55 to 60. For sewer, we get 75 to 80. I think the thing to keep in mind, like for water, for example, residential equivalents are based on meter size. So if you have commercial connections that are larger than 3/4 inch, they're assigned more.
Yeah, but you have water, it's independent because it doesn't have to have a sewer attached to it. That's building outside the city. To have a water connection without a sewer connection.
Correct.
But I'm trying to figure out how you're getting a sewer connection, not having a stormwater connection.
Well, so these are not connections; these are residential equivalents. So, for example,
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so a multifamily building is assigned 1 residential equivalent per dwelling unit, but for stormwater, they would be assigned ESUs based on measured impervious area. And so they don't equate. It's if I say 0.5%.
Gotcha, but you understand that the example isn't working, right?
the multifamily, what paying, but they're getting charged more sewer connections. They're also getting charged more stormwater connections.
Impervious surface, right?
Not necessarily. So multifamily, so for example, if you have a 30-unit multifamily building, that would be 30 residential equivalents. And then stormwater, it's whatever their impervious area is divided by that unit number. So I'm saying, what's 0.5% more apples versus oranges?
Great percentage.
Yes.
Ryan, I know Jason's not here. Numbers off of his head. If they have to think growth, what we're estimating our UGA.
I couldn't tell you for sure. I'd have to double check on that.
So because don't we have
Urban
like,
growth area.
It seems a little low. But what perspective would we have coming up? Fight we have with the multifamily. What we want to build, like probably gonna have 4 multifamily units, but we haven't seen.
We'll have to double check. Jason was a part of this and did supply some of this data, so I can double check that and get back to you.
We can certainly assume more growth. The challenge is if it doesn't happen, we're going to undercollect versus. Right. So it's a balance.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah, so the 0.5% was based off of growth of the
Yes.
So for water, that would include the water service area, though a lot of the homes or the outside of Bonnie Lake.
We would apply it proportionately to every. So basically what we did was for water, we said how many meter equivalents do we have based on connection in city, out city, and we're assuming it all grows proportionally.
Okay, right. And so then does include multifamily.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I kind of am a little suspicious that the Terragon numbers are going to skew the water. That's what I was. I thought that's.
But again, because I just thought of that as well. That's 100 potential units. That's 4,000 potentially. 3,000 to 4,000 people. So at first I was looking at that as a person growth, not necessarily a ability growth. Yeah.
And the other thing to keep in mind is like if we're looking at say a 5-year or maybe it's a 6-year planning period, this is an average number per year. So there might be a development that's happening right now that adds more than 100 water equivalents per year. But then if you don't have as much growth in the future year, so it sort of is intending to average out. But that being said, if these are unrealistically low estimates, then we should update them. But we ran these by staff and based on the expectation in aggregate, it was probably the right order of magnitude.
Quick question, little aside from this, back a couple slides. P, are they in? Not on here, but are they on? They're on Pierce County sewer. Yeah.
Think so.
Okay. I'm just looking because I don't see Pierce County up here as a represented number.
Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted.
And honestly, there was a comparison. I think you might have been the one that developed it that had a lot of those communities, which we could add to this to sort of.
I was only doing rates. I didn't do the SDC connection, so I was just curious where they might. So
it would be very different, right? Remember, they go to Chambers Creek. Way different. Chambers Creek, we
got roads.
Mr. Bunny couldn't make that one happen.
All right, so then the operating forecast we generally based on the 2023-24 budget projections that Sherry provided. We had a couple of adjustments to the cost. Notably, we calculate taxes based on projected revenues, but largely we use the 23-24 budget with adjustments for inflation as specified above. And then for reserve policies, city policy provides for a minimum operating reserve equal to 8% of budgeted operating expenses. There for 2023, what that looks like for water, 638,000, for sewer, 667,000, and then for the stormwater utility, it's 157,000 roughly. And so we start out with a beginning cash and investment balance, estimated ending 22, beginning 23 And then we have our projected revenues, our projected expenses. We look at what we need to set rates to, but it's to maintain, we want to maintain that minimum balance after everything has come in and gone out. And so that directly impacts the rate revenue requirement. So what I thought I'd provide here, this is focusing on the water utility. The city began a policy of automated consumer price index inflation adjustments in 2009. And been making those in recent years, kind of showing the series of increases since 2009. You see in the right-hand column, it indicates when the CPI adjustment happened. Notably, in 2012, there was a decrease in offset projected sewer rate, proposed sewer rate.
Right, but you realize, of course, that's the infamous decrease that's misconstrued a lot of times because it's off of the actual availability charge. So somebody shouldn't be confused thinking that we reduced the water rate by 19.2%. We reduced availability charge, a very small portion of the bill.
I think the minutes will show that the vote was actually on the rates as well. The rates were decreased. Yeah.
I'll forward you the ordinance. I actually have.
Yeah, I looked at the meeting minutes from that. It was a 5-0 vote. Two council members weren't present that night, so on. But
it was on the base rate. That's otherwise, you can imagine you can't take 20% out of the utility and expect it to survive.
So I mean, either way, there was a decrease in the water rates. That is part of the context for the 2017 study, which recommended a series of rate increases from 2019 through 2023, driven by capital funding. And for additional context, that rate study was done around the time of the water system plan update, and there were a series of improvements that were identified. I think it was addressing storage. I think that was a big one. But basically, the Department of Health was requiring the city to demonstrate a viable financial plan for getting the stuff done. And so as a result of that, we were looking at 8.5% increases from 2019 through 2023. The 8.5% rate increase that was planned for this year was waived pending the rate study. So that's one 8.5, and then there was another 8.5 that has been adopted to go into effect January. So kind of looking at that before we get into anything, we've already got like roughly a 17%, a little more than that when you account for compounding, percent rate increase that we would need over existing rates. And so the capital needs forecast here, we're projecting the utility will spend $36.8 million on capital projects over the next 6 years. $14 million of that is mains. 15 million of that is reservoirs. Those are kind of the two big items. Supply investments about $4.5 million. $2.5 million would be everything else. And we are projecting, at least in this scenario, that there's some grant funding, some cash, and otherwise cash resources are covering the cost. For the baseline scenario, we're not assuming any debt issuance. So we're setting rates to generate the revenue needed to cover the costs in excess of whatever fund balance, whatever SDCs are coming in. And I will say that this forecast for the water utility does reflect the updated decrease in the SDC. So there'll be less SDC revenue than there would have been if we kept the existing charge. And so the water.
Can you go back?
Yes.
We have the two reservoirs coming up for a total of 12 million. Is that the 24 and the 26?
correct.
That the record show you were both right. It did not affect the main base rate, but it did affect summer rates over 10.
Right.
Which established the tiered rate after that point. Right. And it did affect.
And so what we're showing for the near-term rate forecast, or I should say this is the revenue forecast, increases of 7% per year for the next 2 years. And then we're looking at 6.5% per year for the next couple of years after that, or actually 3 years after that, and then dropping to the sub-inflationary levels. And this is really driven by, increases in operating costs, and especially as they inflate over time, just keeping up with them, but also generating cash to fund the capital plan. And so, having said that, and this is not on top of the rate increases that have already been adopted. These are saying 23 would be a 7% increase over the current rates, as opposed to the 8%, 8.5% that was already adopted. So this is replacing what has been adopted. And so, put together a couple of scenarios here. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So you're saying it would be less?
The rate increase would be less than what had been previously adopted. So this is trying to take the resources that are available and spread and phase the increases out. In part, the last rate study had projections of capital projects, and things change over time and the cash requirements. Some things might have been put off relative to what they were projected, and then trying to figure out, what do you need to cover the current set of projected needs? This is what we have. And this is funding everything on a cash basis, so no borrowing and no ARPA funding, money that the city has received.
The way you have it there makes it look like it's not as much, but when you add that up over the next through 2028, it's a 39.6 increase. So don't just look at Dan taught me this.
Oh, well, it depends on which way you want to argue, right?
Well, no, Dan taught me this because we argued once about Comcast raising their rates, and I was like, it's a nickel.
It's only 25 cents.
Yeah, it was only 25 cents, but you're like, they don't care. It's percent, and you're only showing $2.44 a month. Right? Over that time frame, that's 39.6% increase over what we're talking about today.
Now, to keep in mind,
without the additional.
Yes, without the scenarios, but also for a frame of reference, 2023. I mean, I've got a couple of clients that they have automated CPI adjustments, automated inflation adjustments, and they're talking about adopting a 10+% increase for 2023 based on inflation alone. And so we're lower than that here. And then, for the future years, we're projecting inflation at least 3% per year more when you account for kind of a weighted average of labor and everything else. And so it's we're a few percent above inflation, but I mean, part of that is there's that capital need that you are not in a sort of steady state business as usual. There's catching up on capital needs. That's driving. So
and that inflation rate is not taking any surprises like we had over the last couple of years, like supply chain issues or COVID.
Yes, and that's actually
or worse that
Yes, no, and that's a great point. And that if we come back, and I would certainly say we should not wait until 5 years and come back and say how do we do. I mean, with the conditions as they are, I'd say come back in maybe a couple of years, 2-3 years, and say is inflation persisting at this elevated level, or has it returned to normal, and then recalibrate and go from there. It's just there's so much changing, and it's changing so quickly. It's hard to make a longer term plan and then stick to it because there's just so much in the air.
The other thing, sorry, Mr. Mayor. The other thing is you have at 7 seats. We're at 10.
You're at 10.
Our base rate is 10.
So this is the average water consumption of a single family home, as based on the customer data that we received.
That's an example. That's
okay.
This is intended to be roughly an
average.
Yeah, you're referring to where it changed to next year, right?
Well, the apples to apples thing I did was
okay.
Like Buckley is 7, but we're 10. So I wanted to make sure that that rate was reflective over that example.
So
like what we actually.
What is CCF?
CCF is 100 cubic feet.
778 gallons, something like that.
748 gallons per 100 cubic feet. So I
70.
want to say in the neighborhood of 5,000 gallons, kind of roughly.
Have you done any studies on other cities? The comparability of our rate increase versus the.
So after I do all of the financial plans, there'll be a rate comparison slide.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and then we can talk about how all those things are different. But yeah, that's a question that gets asked very often. Came prepared to show the numbers say. We might need to answer some questions about some of the more subtle differences, but I will say that I have helped communities do benchmarking studies, and depending on how far you go, they can be massively involved efforts, like $30,000-$40,000 study to survey and get different talk to people about operating practices, policies, differences among communities. So there are lots of differences. Which we see in the rate, and it's also the rate structure. It's a function. Some have a higher base rate, and we look at 7 CCF, they're going to look, the rankings are going to be different than if we're looking at 15 CCF. So part of the problem is how do we present the information in a way that isn't overwhelming? And
well, you failed there.
yeah. No, I understand.
So, excuse me. So if I read this chart right, it's projecting out a constant O&M expense rate that isn't increasing. I'm not sure that passes the spell test for me.
When you say O&M, what, I'm not quite sure.
Operation. I'm assuming O&M's operation and maintenance expenses.
Yes.
That dark gray box looks like it's pretty much the same level all the way across all those.
And so I apologize. So on this slide, there is a kind of big green color between. I'm not sure if that's coming up.
That's debt service.
Yeah, that's debt service. But if you're focusing only on the bottom part, I mean, those operating expenses are going up by the 23 and 24 projections, which are straight from the budget. And then beyond that, we've got most expenses going up at 3% per year, labor costs going up at 5% per year. But given those percent adjustments and the scale of the graph, it doesn't look like they're going up dramatically.
Got it. So it's the scale. It's the million scale there.
Yes.
So it is kind of going up that one revenue at existing rates. That's a straight line. So the gap between the black line and the other box is smaller. The CIP fund's getting bigger.
And actually, so for what it's worth, the solid black line is increasing slightly, but increasing with the 0.5% growth at the existing rates. But yeah, I mean, we're assuming 0.5% growth, and we're assuming at least 3% inflation. So by definition, it's going to close our gap, and we're going to have to raise rates just to keep up with that. And then the light boxes at the top, that's basically the money that's going toward funding the CIP.
And the debt service, does that include the public works bond?
Yeah. So it's the water utilities, bonds, and loans. And I think that might be the main one at this point.
That's a 20-year, right?
Started in 2020.
What's that? The project itself, or when the revenue? Oh, yeah.
The debt. I think that sounds right.
Asked it when Grigsby was here. I don't know when we have to buy a car, don't get it for another 15 months.
I'm sorry.
I know it's the perfect.
Given the
I know.
import
I'll
of
go.
what we're talking about, this really is, as Councilmember Evans did, it's an open house. Let's just, if you have a question.
Yeah. Okay. No problem.
Just ask.
I think the reason why we have some questions about this math teacher, I just feel like this graph is a little hard to read because it's a bit skewed. Just the way that it looks as far as it. I'm assuming at the bottom you're starting at 0.
Bottom is 0. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For $5 million.
Yeah. I think this would be because really and truly, without really looking at this with just I don't even know. Everything does look fairly level. It's really hard to see what exactly are those increases, how significant they are, and if we're talking in millions, that does matter, right? And so these numbers look so similar. At all of the lines, they look similar. Even the straight line that you say is not a straight line, it's actually going up. It's hard to tell because of the way this graph is being. Does that make sense?
It does, but the problem is when you look at the 2028 costs and the scale required, like there's no, I mean, I have to show you a different graph for each year on different slides so that you could see it. I mean, the message I want you to take away from the graph is we have our revenues. There might be some modest growth, but mainly what's happening is that the expenses are going up. You can see visually the light bars at the top are getting narrower over time because costs are going up.
Yeah.
And the dashed line is showing the revenues, how we're raising the revenues to cover the costs. And that's really about all that we can get from this graph. And then, I mean, just here are the increases and here are the key drivers behind it. That's the intent.
Angela, on 7%, or 7 million, 3% is 210,000. So over that whole thing, you're talking probably 750,000.
Okay. Well, even if you were,
I could take the table with the increases off and make the graph cover the whole slide and then put that on a separate.
that probably because this is a very useful graph to try to analyze and look at, and it's difficult to do so the way it's being.
All right, we can that change.
Or, make some.
So we ran a couple of scenarios. And so the first one, the baseline is what I just presented. It assumes full cash funding for the CIP. The second scenario, we assume that $4.2 million in ARPA funds are made available to the water utility to offset the capital costs, and then the rates have to recover the cash for everything else. And so the increases at that point go down to, I think there's a 4.5 next year and then 4% per year after that. So it really does enable to spread the rate increase and keep it roughly that inflationary level, at least as we've assumed it, for the purpose of the analysis. And then the second scenario is we basically say we do the ARPA funding and we assume some borrowing. And so I've got that down there. I think that's $4.6 million in 2027 based on the capital projects that are scheduled out there. Surprisingly, the rate increases aren't that much better. And the reason for that is because once we issue bonds, the bond market and the bond rating agencies have certain conditions that they like to see. And so what we assume is once you issue bonds, there's another target reserve balance equal to 180 days of operating expenses. And that's combined operating and capital. That's not additive to what we were already assuming. It's inclusive of. But having to set the rates to make sure we stay at that 180-day target means that, that's as far as we can get them down with the revenue bond scenario. If there was some other kind of debt that didn't require that reserve, like if you could get like a drinking water state revolving fund loan or a public works trust fund loan, or even a loan from the general fund or something, and you didn't have those conditions, you could possibly get the increases down below that.
And this doesn't affect our debt service. Price is completely separate from bond debt services cap that we have, 32. But it doesn't hit that because I think we took out a $26 million loan against a $32 million cap. That cap space isn't related to this.
So revenue bonds are not included in the cap. There's not really a limit to how much an issue in bond. Basically your ability to pay it back is what the issue. Okay. Those bonds are secured by utility revenues, where the ones you're talking about are secured by the full credit of the city, and then that's when that cap applies.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I'm assuming then, with the addition of the ARPA, with this alternative, the first alternative, is that what it's being? Okay, that would not necessarily bring down rates for our customers. It would just bring down that rate increase.
Correct.
Okay, so regardless, our customers need to know that what you're saying is that we're just bringing that we would only be able to bring down the rate increase.
Yes. So this slide here shows the utility spending $36.8 million on projects of its funds. So that ARPA funding, the $4.2 million, offsets that. But otherwise, rates and then whatever cash balances the city has for the water utility are what has to fund that. So it will reduce the rate increases. It will not decrease the rates.
So you have scenarios in there where, arguably you have that capital cost at $36.8 million, right? So what if I said that's not really what the number is? It's 30. What is that to the rates?
We could run pretty much any scenario.
Because I've always had the question in the back of my mind of, you have the arguments about, that's not a $10 million project. It's only supposed to be a $7 million project. That really, that's $3 million. Congratulations to Wyman. You saved the taxpayers 10 cents.
Yeah.
So $2.
Yeah. So it really depends on the order of magnitude of the difference. So, if we're talking $3 million, like for example, you said, we wouldn't have to raise rates to generate that money. But the way we do it, it also depends on when. Because because obviously if stuff is up front, you don't have the ability to spread things out. On the tail end, can reduce the increases gradually.
But I don't know what that. But you haven't yet. Right.
Well, you can kind of see from the alternative one where it shows he's using ARPA
Oh,
four
the
point.
$4 million. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, so
if
that
you say you cut $4 million out of it,
And then use ARPA, that's what you would get.
ARPA, you'd go from $1.50 or to
0.5% on that.
240.
save like $1.
Yeah.
And you got $4 million out of the project budget.
$1 a month.
Well,
Save.
These are monthly bill impacts. Yeah.
So it's $12.
a year.
Yeah. But
$24 for
when
2
you
years.
factor in inflation, it's so
It's a
Angela's
cup of
question-
coffee.
Angela's one was great in the fact that all right, if we apply all of this ARPA, it reduces our debt over time. Does not impact our rate. What would it take?
Well, it reduces the rate increase.
Rate increase.
But still, what he's saying is
What would it
proposed.
What would it take to actually reduce our rate come January 1st, 2024?
Well, how do you do that?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, but
So I mean, I can tell you the mechanics of how.
Well, and
Yeah.
keep in mind what Ms. Ryerson told us right at the beginning. Only our introductory.
Sure.
We're going to spend more time answering Councilmember Swyman's question about how we do this. So,
Hypothetical. How do you?
So the hypothetical would be you use the 4.2 million ARPA funding to smooth the rates instead of investing in the capital projects, and then you debt finance it, and then but again, the type of debt will determine whether you have to meet an additional reserve requirement or not.
But there's no scenario in your mind in which I'm just throwing out 2020. I mean, we can ever possibly reduce our and now according to my math here, water rates are not really much of an issue. I know that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But overall, sewer rates by 20%. That at all?
So, I mean, I would say no, but that's because, and also, I mean, I'm sure Ryan could attest to, I mean, there are needs that have been deferred for a considerable amount of time. I mean, to the point that the last water system plan update, the Department of Health was like, hey, you guys have been kicking the can down the road for decades. And
Yeah, and I totally get that. I just have to have an answer for when
Yes.
people ask me, why can't you reduce my
It's been here for decades. I
Well,
think.
kind of are. I think a couple people alluded to the rate on the books is 8.5% come January 1. So Chris is offering to reduce it down to 7 from 8.5. You already have that on the books in code.
But
I know.
it's like when Cole says, you saved $50 today. No, I didn't. I wouldn't have bought that if it didn't cost me $9. So it's still an increase. It's just,
I mean,
they're still spending money when they say you save.
well, I would say longer term, I mean, to the extent that you invest in main replacements, you reduce your system water loss. So there are operating implications. That's an example of something. But in general, the equation is we're covering an operating budget. So, can the city cut the operating budget? There are certain costs. Maybe there's the general fund can allocate less to the utility. I mean, I don't know the nuts and bolts of that, but I mean, you have to reduce your operating costs, or you have to. I mean, the debt service is a fixed obligation. No way around that. And then, other than that, you just don't do capital, or you cut capital. And there are implications. The system ages. You will go from being able to proactively maintain things to being reactive. I mean, I was at a council study session earlier this month where they were talking about sewer backups costing $120,000 a pop because the sewer mains were not maintained and they were backing up into people's homes. And
I understand the whole process. I have to ask the question.
Yeah.
That's my job. Seems like she's got one too.
In August, I have to. I'm like, oh, it's bounced now.
that seems like more an issue of consumption than anything. Yeah.
It doesn't happen like that every month. But a $700 water bill, not our water.
Yeah.
You don't.
Right.
Yeah.
That particular issue, one that I am as well as far as the restrictions, what they are requiring from our homeowners and what government could probably as far as some as far as water restrictions is concerned. But the question that I have for you is, out of that $695 bill that you paid, what was that completely water, or was it sewer as well?
Yeah, it's always sewer's always on it.
But like I said, I brought it, but I I'll be struggling with that type of balance. August, or next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you say it was, did you actually pay that in August, meaning June bill, or did you pay that in October? Gotcha. Oh, okay.
I thought it was before, but
No, and that's fine. I mean, the reason why I'm asking the questions is that is exactly what we're trying to address here. To get that lowered somehow. Now, the question that I have with that is this study that we're talking about, hypothetically, is basically vacuum. It's not taking any efforts for grant money that we might be able to come up with, or any sort of endeavor that we might be from, say.
Correct. And what I would say is, for those, the way we generally advise, if you think it's a relatively high chance of receiving it and you can choose to not do the project if you don't get the funding, then we can model it. But I mean, if you're gambling on getting it, it's sort of like the news is better now, but it's going to be that much worse if you don't get it. So sort of keeping that in mind. But I mean, we can certainly model scenarios where we get additional grant funding or whatever, and that would directly benefit the rate forecast based on the amount of money that rates need to generate cover the projects.
And just in a completely different way, we're not even taking into account compressing tiers.
No, this is purely based on the status quo, and then the bills are also bi-monthly for residential. So the sewer rate being about $120 times 2. I mean, there's $240 right there.
And Councilmember Fullerton, I understand it's completely against your nature, but tonight is actually kind of rude night. Just jump in.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but yeah, that was my question though, was about the tiers. So this doesn't have anything to do with, are we looking into getting rid of the 3 times the amount in the summer? And
so I was going to get into that. The very next steps. I don't have results tonight, but we are trying to wrap up that analysis. All this is saying how much revenue from rates, and that's what this is showing. And this is showing, just to give you a sense of scale, what the impact to a typical resident would be under the status quo with the increases. But yeah, there'll be rate structure stuff, and I certainly have a strong preference to steer in the direction of simplifying the block structure.
yeah, and as well, we are going to be going to a monthly bill rather than a bi-monthly soon. That's true.
We are working towards that. I believe the update that was sent out to you, you're going to run that first scenario. I believe it's January we're doing a test in January with the hopes to switch over to that in April.
Oh, yes. So I don't ever remember getting a $34 water bill, so I'm kind of wondering why council had.
Well, you're billed by monthly, so typically,
I get the 34.
7 CCF per month would be
Yeah,
14
and the other
by
month
monthly,
was
so it
what
would be twice that.
Yeah.
Ours is 10 and 20. So my average is $130
for 2 months. For
Well,
sewer and water.
I always sewer's always on there.
Right.
Right. Sewer's always on there.
Oh.
So it's mine usually is like 126 to like 132 on strictly sewer. Other ones are about 160 to 5.
And the other thing we're doing, working on.
I've never had one over 200.
Changing bill to be for a friendly bar. It's breaking down costs. Not sure. For action.
Why is there stark contrast between bills?
It's consumption. I mean,
But that
different. Yeah, because we go from $2 to $4 to $8 once you get above, was it 30?
You guys, I use lots of water. I'm not gonna lie. We have a huge lawn. It's green. It's my husband likes to water his lawn. Our bill is never that much. Never.
Yeah, and I over
Why
the
is there
10 years
such
I've had,
huge
this is where I'm at.
discrepancy?
I track mine to make sure my
Oh, I
water
wish.
Laundry.
is set.
Laundry.
I just want to touch on it. I'm younger. But you are laundry. I've asked that question. Why? But I don't actually, apart from our lawn, have a large. Apart from our lawn, I don't. Household tell water is.
The cost.
No, and part of the variance there is, and Councilmember Baldwin, I don't know where you live, but say in Sky Island, where I am very close to that, with all of that, the way that the houses were built were essentially where you're talking roughly 6 inches of topsoil, maybe a little bit more than that. It takes a lot more water to maintain that greenness to the lawn than a lot of people, than in a lot of places.
The only time mine was ever over 200 was I forgot my bill to pay my bill once, and when I got it,
my God!
yeah, when I got it, it was $400 or what did I do? And then I went back and realized
cheap.
I hear that.
Well, Mr. Mayor, too, it may incur a slight charge or a slight elbow twisting with certain folks, but people are able to get an extraordinarily detailed bill if they have one of those meters or the ones.
Yes.
They can tell you by the hour and what you're using when. It can be very informative to the consumer. Try to figure out where their water's going. Hint, hint. Some people have found out that they had used an extraordinary amount of water at 5 a.m. and couldn't figure it out until sprinklers were hosed up.
Oh, okay, we're ready to.
Sewer. It's a little bit different here. So we're not, again, to be clear on the water, we're not doing those rate tier analysis yet.
Correct. I mean, we're wrapping the analysis up on our end, but we will be coming back with that.
Yeah, because that'll be good. It'll be interesting for me to understand what happens when you eliminate or consolidate those tiers. Yep, thanks.
And so the sewer rate increases, the 2009 rate study recommended a series of increases to cover anticipated operating capital needs. The council opted to implement CPI adjustments in January 2011 and 2012, and then deferred larger increases until mid-2012. So there was kind of a series of years where there were 2 increases in 1 year, one in January and one in July. The 2017 rate study recommended rate increases from 2019 to 2021 that were driven by the capital funding needs, and you see those there. And then beginning in 22, the CPI policy kicked in. And so this year there was a CPI adjustment to 2021 rates. So the sewer utilities forecast $26.3 million in capital projects over the 6-year period. And so mains and inflow and infiltration reduction would be about $14 million. Lift stations, another $4.5 million. Upgrades at the Sumner wastewater treatment facility, $7.7 million. And then there was the sewer plant update with another $300,000 roughly. And then, so again, cash resources were expected to fund the cost, so no borrowing or anything like that. Looking at the sewer financial plan, we're showing that the existing rates cover operating expenses and debt service and provide some money for capital. But based on the projected capital needs, we're not projecting the need for increases for the next, at this point, 4 years, but that may change depending on how inflation progresses over the next few years. But so this would basically waive the CPI adjustment. This is not on top of the CPI.
If I could take a page out of Councilmember Fox, he's going to ask it if I don't. Instead of applying the full ARPA funds to water, which goes to not only our citizens but those outside of it, what would happen if you modeled that money going to sewer, which is 100% affecting our citizens at the rate that's actually affecting the bill greater than
So we could model that, and I would say if the goal was to decrease rates, if you dedicated the ARPA funding to the sewer capital plan, you could possibly do it. I mean, I'd have to run the numbers, but
I imagine it'd be similar dollar first month for the.
It could be, and for what it's worth, I mean, I by default kept it at 0. There's no, I mean, potentially we could decrease it. But I guess the tough part is by 27 and 28, we're back up to sort of some increase. So if we decrease rates now, those increases are going to be higher. And so it's like, yeah, it's good news now, and then it'll be bad news later. And we ultimately want the rates to follow a logical progression over time. So decreasing it this year and then increase it in another year or two is not typically a strategy that we recommend. But the ARPA funding might give you the basis of doing something more. And maybe what you do is put the ARPA funding in and maybe set the 6-year forecast to 0 and then see what decrease you can do something like that. I actually just did that for another community.
Well, I would assume your O&M going up over time, though, right?
Yes, and it would eat away at the ARPA funds.
No, but this does not show the ARPA.
This has no ARPA funding. I'm saying, so if we were to put ARPA funding in or move the ARPA funding to sewer and decrease the rate, fund balance would be eaten up by.
Yeah, but for your example on the screen there, you have 0% increase.
Yes,
and yet the O&M is going up over.
Correct. So it is eating up that light shaded bar at the top. So that gap is getting smaller. So that's money that's available for capital above operating and debt service costs. So that's not necessarily what the capital projects are in a particular year. Now, if it turned out that there were projects that were driving cash needs, that might define the size of those things. But that's not happening in sewer.
Well, we have a feeling what would be interesting, but the Bonnie Lakes O&M versus Sumner.
Yeah. Would you mind going back one slide? And looking at the capital projects, 2023, 2028, Johnstone, is that any or improved construction, or is that simply or repairs?
This is what was approved in your capital improvement plan.
No, I do remember that, but I just need to be reminded of.
For the most part, the wastewater treatment plant upgrades, that would be the biosolids modernization project, which is going to be replacement infrastructure but that's the closest of all the projects in the 23 to 28 biennium that I would identify as you described, something that is do the rest. I'd have to take a look at the list again, but most of this is just repair and replacement for existing infrastructure.
Okay. And I know it's not the microphone this time, but I'm going to keep talking until that voice goes.
Right, yeah.
Perfect.
One of the things in your future meeting, and I sent this over back in February, I think, when Sherry started talking with you guys, was what I wanted to see was capping our residential sewer from 10 to 8,
right,
which would lower that bill to CFFs, whatever that rate may be at. Is that something that is in
That-
your,
That's coming. So, I mean,
that is part of, that is.
yeah, so we consider that a rate structure issue. And so
Yeah.
effectively what it would do is it would reduce your revenue. And the question is how much? And so that we're sort of going to solidify that.
And do you also have increasing the base rate from 10 to like 11 or 12? Just to see.
Not on the top of my head, but
Just to
I
see
mean,
what that does, yeah.
yeah, part of it, what I was going to do at the end is get confirmation of like the sorts of things. See.
Okay.
Yeah, because I thought that we were going to have a scenario or a flat rate thing. Much as I think that might have an issue with disproportionate
Still-
equity issues, but still, most people look at that volumetric thing and they have a
Still tiered through consumption, just not a winter summer rate. Just
You're right.
sewer?
You're saying it's a flat
Oh,
rate.
no,
Flat
yeah,
rate.
no, water, yeah.
even though again it's may have issues because I think it proportionately affects people, but still, people have always having a heartache with why do I have to pay for extra sewer in the summer when I'm watering my grass?
Right.
Well, you don't, by the way. But okay, that's
It goes to your stormwater now, Dan. That's why you got to triple it.
So, any other questions on? There were no scenarios because we had the ARPA on the water side.
okay.
Stormwater financial plan. So, effective January of 2007, the ordinance 1203 increased the monthly rate by $2 per year until reaching the current rate of $14 in 2011. Basically that same ordinance eliminated the annual CPI adjustment. So the current rate of $14 has been in place since 2011. And the 2017 review that we did not include the stormwater utility. So we're kind of coming in fresh and sort of seeing what the rate increases need to be. So the stormwater utility is funding or expected to fund $6.6 million in projects over the 6-year period, and we're showing that cash resources are going to cover the projected cost. There is some slight amount of grant funding for the NPDES permit, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit requirements.
And is that projected or you actually have
I think the city gets that,
We do normally.
Okay.
so it offsets like it's $25,000.
It's the large capital in 2020. What is that $3 million capital that added? That's not right. 2028, some gigantic project.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head what
I'm attempting to look that up.
project.
Oh, okay.
So the stormwater financial plan. So you can look at the percent increases, but then I would encourage you to look at the dollar increases because stormwater utilities, given that they are of a smaller scale than water and sewer utilities, you're going to see higher percentages on a smaller number. But we're looking at basically 11.5% increases per year for 23 and 24, followed by slightly smaller increases for the years after that. And this is really covering O&M. We can see that there's actually the current stormwater rate is not fully covering operating costs, much less the capital investment that's going to be needed. And so that's really covering both those, fixing that operating deficit and then generating money to fund the CIP or what's causing these increases. And we've tried spreading them out as much as possible. But having said that, the monthly rate per ESU, equivalent service unit, would go up by roughly $1.61, $1.80 for the 2024, and all single family customers pay the same rate for stormwater.
Why is the stormwater? I mean, doesn't that goes through the sewer plant, right?
Ideally, it all goes to someplace other than the wastewater treatment plant. However, we do have a certain amount of infiltration and inflow, which is stormwater, surface water, groundwater, that makes its way into the sewer collection system due to loose manhole lids, cracked sewer mains, and so on. But ideally, stormwater is separate from the sewer utility and what's being collected in the sewer system.
So we're paying for rain.
You could be. Could be.
That's why you want to look at those sewer main replacements done so there's not a bunch of rainwater leaking into the sewer pipe.
But don't we have the grants that we just got? Isn't that going towards those repairs?
So the grants that we were just talking about, you're talking about the $50,000.
No, I was talking about the 3 million.
Oh, the 3 million. So yes, that would go to potentially to address infiltration inflow. Actually, though, it was earmarked for Cedarview water and sewer main replacement.
Oh,
the particular money that you're talking
That's
about.
right. That's $1.5 million to water and $1.5 million to sewer.
And just a footnote, I did both Leslie Harris and I have emailed Congresswoman Schreier's office and have not heard back yet about the status of that.
No, she was busy.
So for stormwater, we ran a couple of scenarios here. The first one, and so the baseline assumes status quo on the SDC. And sewer was the same thing. Water, we put the decrease in. But so we ran an alternative with the updated stormwater SDC. Given the discussion that we had earlier, there's a chance that that charge might change. We get a better number on the denominator. But so, I mean, it shows a modest benefit, roughly, 1% or so per year on the rate increase if you do the updated SDC. And then if you do the updated SDC and then issue debt, you can get the increases to more like 7% per year. So, the one thing that I would bring up about that second alternative is if you go the debt route for stormwater, it sort of pushes you to the debt route of water because you ultimately want to have 180 days. Like that will apply to all the utilities because all the utility revenue is jointly secured revenue. So I showed you on the water side, I showed you a scenario where we just used ARPA funding, and then we showed another one we did ARPA and debt. And so that might be, depending on how you go here, it may impact that. And also, given that, maybe you do debt on water and stormwater, and then you divert ARPA to sewer. That's the way to go. But that's certainly something that we can look at if there's interest.
I have a question. So are 100% of residents would be paying storm water, right?
Inside city.
Water, it's a little bit different. With sewer, so yeah, for this, it's all residents that are within city limits paying for the basically the maintenance of different pipes, different mains, just wherever there's damage to try to stop water flow from going into.
Everybody pays into the stormwater utility.
Okay, but that's the purpose of it.
Including commercial
Correct.
as well.
Okay, because other than that, they would be going into retention ponds like you were talking about, right?
That is, I'm sorry.
But like Ryan was saying, you guys are doing a study to figure out what that actual, I mean, it could only be 1% of what's going into the treatment system is rain runoff, or 30%.
And sewer's paying for that, right? So we have program stuff, maintenance issues on the sewer side, so the sewer pays for that.
Yeah, I mean,
Sewer utility.
For the ongoing maintenance of the sewer utility, correct.
there was a pretty big one in Yelm where you were at, right? Like a big main leak that was tons of water that you guys figured out.
Yeah, I mean, we would find stuff like that all the time. I mean, nothing triggers my memory as being huge, but certainly where your water system is concerned, there's always a certain amount of unaccounted for water that you're contending with. Staff does a really great job of tracking down those every year.
It's ongoing thing. It's ongoing constantly. Yeah. And mathematically, it may be kind of funny. Increase your sewer cost if you fix more ILI, but that's that.
Yeah, well, my
strength
issue. Oil. I love it. What wasn't in our tank?
The other point I wanted to make on the stormwater rate, not to complicate this any more than I already have, is that
you're doing great.
and so the stormwater rate, again, the ESU's equivalent service use, non-single family are defined based on measured impervious area divided by the code specified impervious area per equivalent unit. So to the extent that you have a large commercial building, they can be allocated multiple ESUs. So this increase it showed for a single family home, and it would have a proportionate impact on those. But I mean, if you're a commercial customer with 100 ESUs, you're going to pay 100 times that, and it could be a real splitter.
So regarding ESUs, keep in mind that every residential, every single family home in Bonnie Lake pays one.
Okay.
That's equitable to 2,600 square feet.
Right.
So when we
not what you just said though, right?
So when we start looking at something like, say, Costco, for example,
right.
maybe not the best example, but they may have however many hundreds of thousands of square feet of impervious surface. You divide that by the 2,600 and you get Costco's number of ESUs that then their rate is based on.
Gotcha.
So it's the square footage thing.
Mainly, I just wanted to disclose, I mean, this is a modest impact for a single family home, but for a larger business, there might be different impacts.
It's still the same percent.
Same percent, but yeah.
Big Fifax by 500 square foot chunks, yeah.
And there are certainly ways to parse it out. I mean, even for single family, say, oh, if you're a home of this size, you can have one rate. And it all depends on how complicated you want to get. And it's a $14 monthly rate. Yeah. Yep. All right. So here is the monthly bill survey. And so this shows Bonnie Lake at the top, and this is largely because of the sewer rate. The water bill is relatively competitive, and stormwater is as well.
Our sewer's consistent.
Yes, please.
That is a contributing factor. It's not the sole reason.
What else about
You're missing the local agreement we have with Sumner.
That we're a 50-year-old city with infrastructure that's starting to fail more now than Sumner that recently built out over the last 10 years. So their costs for that are much less for maintenance and repair, where ours is 30 to 40 years old. So and then I would imagine some poor engineering many years ago where we put 90-degree kinks or 45-degree kinks in the sewer lines over by Walmart, just trying to undo all that kind of stuff.
And the fact that it's
but
not
it's still
our
cost.
wastewater treatment plant, it's Sumner's, and we're dependent on them. So, yes, ma'am.
Over $100 million?
Yes. Yeah, it is.
How obviously the repairs of time amount a lot of overtime, and they have as work.
Right.
Terrible.
You want to know what the point of diminished returns on how many years of repairs are we going to get versus?
Yeah.
I believe it's over $100 million to do our own treatment facility.
So there's several components there. Again, just to review, I mean, there's one, you've got to find a piece of property that's going to accommodate it. So you're looking at a fairly large land purchase, but that's minor compared to the infrastructure cost. You'll have the cost of the plant, which we have just roughly estimated with some consultant assistance somewhere between $80 and $100 million for the plant. But then you got to replumb the entire collection system to push everything to that new plant as well. So there's untold millions of dollars to take all of our different lift stations, our collection system, and turn much of it to flow another way. So you'd have that cost as well. And then over and above all of that, if you can stomach that, you're going to have to hire 5, 6, 7 employees to man it for ever. To construct a new plant. So it's a great question, and it's my quick answer is no. I think that this is actually, we're going to continue to find, and we're going to work with our partners on this, but that it's actually a pretty fair deal for the city of Bonnie Lake.
Right, yeah.
I think that one of the things we have to consider too is just the permitting for treatment plants in the state is getting pretty rough. The Department of Ecology, who handles the permitting for these facilities, is really trying to drive communities to a more regional approach. And so they are a little reluctant, and it's getting harder all the time for cities any city, but cities our size, because the big ones already own all this stuff, right? But cities our size to get the permitting to have their own and operate their own wastewater treatment facility. So really, when it comes down to it, we're already operating more in line with what Department of Ecology's vision is for cities in the state of Washington. So to vary from that will take time, a whole lot of money, and then just the ongoing cost to staff it and maintain it.
And to add to that, the fact, I mean, going back to the discussion I had earlier about when you have a smaller system, cost per customer, cost per unit treated goes up. So we would separate from Sumner, and then you'd have a smaller plant that would have a higher unit cost on top of all the money that you had to pay to staff it and build it. So,
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but water source to kick that back into?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Holly does direct groundwater or ground injection, but then they're hauling off their solids. So you don't necessarily need a river, but it is getting increasingly challenging to find a way to dispose of the treated wastewater.
Man, would you mind sticking around to the end of the meeting? I wouldn't mind walking out with you. We're in the same neighborhood, so I want to talk about a couple things. Okay, thanks.
any other questions on this? Just kind of summarizing the updates, the preliminary findings, I guess is probably the more accurate term than recommendations at this point. Updating the SDCs to recover an equitable share of cost of growth. For water, that's involving a decrease. For sewer, it's a slight increase, $150. And then stormwater, it's a more material increase, but then I think we may tweak that number, as I mentioned before. I guess.
So, I struggle with decrease to the water SDC, right? I mean, because what's our project? I guess I need to hear from Jason what our projected growth is and how that's affecting single family homes versus all the multifamily units coming, right? Because I'm like, what do we expect in like the next 4 years as far as growth? I certainly anticipate a lot of pressure on the multifamily side. So, I'm not a real fan of lowering that SDC charge.
That coming in, that could help offset longer.
Right.
So I guess just
So I don't understand why we would lower the SDCs for water.
Yeah. So what I'd offer there is the city's authority to charge the SDC offered or granted by RCW 3592025 is recovering a proportionate share of the cost of the system. It has nothing to do with the revenue that would be generated or the resulting rate impacts or anything. I think, and your attorney can also provide an opinion on this, but if we're showing a cost that's materially lower than what you're currently charging, you would be at risk to keep what your current charge is. If you're justifying it by the rate impact or expected rate impact, I think there would be shaking around.
And the growth.
Wait. You just told me that because you showed me that number, I have to lower it? Now you just told me?
I'm showing you that this is the updated charge.
Pretty much.
Now, pretty much. I mean, it's at some point like, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Councilmember Climents, the growth had to do with the rates. It didn't have to do with the SDCs. That was a different.
SDC is about the capacity of the system as defined by the water system plan. It's not taking into account what development's happening this year or next year or 5 years from now. It's
Right, but 20% reduction of that with increased CIP, why would we want to deduct that and let that 7% go up to cover the cost annually when we may be able to capture some of that and keep that increase a little more reasonable?
Well, I mean, the SDC is limited to a share of system costs defined by the cost of the infrastructure. So
Totally separate.
totally separate matter.
There's the Palermo case. So there's the Palermo case that was up, I think, by Tarragon, who sued us for overcharging for SDCs without having the supporting documentation. And he had quite a significant payment in that lawsuit where we had
Millions, literally.
literally millions.
When was that?
Palermo,
Versus United
20
1959.
Oh, yeah. It's an excellent case to read, by the way. It really
years ago,
2005 or
was it?
Was it specific to us?
Was specific to us, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so it wasn't a case.
Palermo versus Bonnie
Like,
Lake.
we were actually them.
So the main thing I'd say about that is, so showing this now, you're not necessarily obliged to go hunt down developers that recently for paying the difference back from that.
2008. You're talking Palermo, like
Yeah,
2008.
that's a fun case.
That was Tarragon.
Well, Palermo, but they're cousins, right?
So what you're telling me is because our capacity, our plan said we have this much investment and it gave us this much capacity that we can lower our rates.
So what the system plan said is basically we have, and actually I started out with, it talks about the maximum day capacity of the system, and there's a certain number of gallons per day per residential equivalent. And so we have the maximum day capacity of the system divided by the maximum day capacity required per residential equivalent gets you your residential equivalent number. And then we compare that to what is the current maximum day demand, not the capacity, but the actual current maximum day demand. And we have, there's the utilization. So there's, and what we found was basically 73% growth in your current maximum day demand the system can accommodate. And so we look at the residential equivalents for the charge being based on meter size. Say we have this many meter equivalents, and then we have 73% growth based on the maximum day demand. And so that is where we got our denominator from. And that was significantly higher growth estimate than what was in, presumably what was in the previous calculation underlying current charge.
I guess I'm struggling with how going from 640 units to 1,000 units affects this. Not an order of magnitude change, but it
Bring up to speed. There's a housing development multifamily that was currently projected for 600, and now it's looking like 1,000.
And I'm trying to remember. I think for multifamily, it's one residential equivalent per dwelling. I think, yeah. So literally, it would be your existing number, your 9,095, going to your 530, whatever that is, and basically 5,304, and so that difference per multifamily be what you lose relative to the existing structure. But the SDC is a charge for cost recovery, not revenue generation. So that's the point I have to keep coming back to.
I got that point.
Okay.
Just trying to understand the impact of 500 more units than we had planned, right? What percentage is that of our capacity? How that affects that calculation. I'm just poking holes in the data set we gave you, right?
So
500 a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, right? That'd be a lot of revenue. I mean, we're raising rates because CIP, right? And SDC is the way to replace CIP.
To fund CIP,
yeah.
Up to a certain percentage, though.
Right.
And so, I mean, in fairness, we're not necessarily accounting for the 600,000 residential equivalents that you're projecting, at least based on the 0.5% per growth. We're looking at more like 95 to 100. So, having said that, maybe we get closer to what we would have been at the existing charge, at the updated charge, with the additional residential equivalents that we haven't incorporated.
If I could interject, I was just looking at the time of the issues that we have in the meeting until 9 o'clock. You are available to answer a lot of these questions after this presentation, meaning by email or days to where us who doesn't do this sort of thing, we can ask you these questions and then get to where we understand it, hopefully.
Sure.
But okay.
I would say maybe for simplicity, maybe funnel it through Sherry.
Yeah, I would prefer something like that. That way he's not getting the same question and having to answer it multiple times. His time does cost the city, so it's not.
Oh, yes, I'll ask you.
There are 3 other open items. Huh?
Okay. So
if we could,
So really quickly, I mean, we talked about the rate forecast. This is kind of just aggregating it. I mean, one thing to note is assuming no increase to the sewer rates for the next couple of years, we're looking at something that's sub-inflation as far as the increase to the monthly rate. There may be some tweaks to this based on the different, feedback that we get, maybe after the meeting, but at the very least, that's what that's looking like. And then I guess just for the sake of moving this along, I wanted to focus on next steps. I mean, the first step, refining the financial plans based on your input. Our scope calls for a cost of service analysis that looks at how much each customer class should pay. I'm inclined to suggest that not proceed with that, because if we're looking at relatively high revenue increases for water, and for sewer we're looking at nothing or low or potentially a reduction, it sort of makes less sense to be shifting from single family to commercial or vice versa. We can certainly come back and discuss that with you, but it could also come back and say single family is underpaying and we need to do, instead of a 7% water rate increase, maybe it's like 10%. And so it's like, do we want to make the losers that much more loser at this time, or do we want to wait until we get to more of a steady state to do that? We can do the rate structure stuff that you're interested in without doing that. We can say, existing cost distribution, and then we can modify the rate structure without shifting among classes. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Equitable banks on consumption.
It is, but at the same time, the rates are set based on an allocation to each class. And so, if, for example, single family is underpaying, then their volume rates would need to go up more to get the equitable share. When we talk about based on consumption, that focuses on equity within the class, but not between different classes. So yeah, the equity question is very complex. There are multiple levels. It's like my rates are fair because I'm covering my cost that I can document. My rates are fair because I allocate costs to customer classes based on their demands. And my rates are fair because there's a consumption charge where people that use more and put strain on the system pay for that. There are different definitions, and we can have any combination of those in the study. So really, what I wanted to see is how interested are you in looking at the allocation between classes?
I feel like you pay for what you use. I don't know.
So I'm saying, should commercial rates go up by a lower percentage than single family because of how they impact the system?
And right now, that's a rhetorical question.
It's a rhetorical question.
Good. So,
yeah, well, and part of it is I don't want to come here and plop something in front of you and say, well, now you got to do this. I mean, it's weird if there's a massive inequity and you don't do anything.
Okay. And I would say follow your recommendation and postpone that till another time. That's just my personal.
Because I would say, adding the impact of the revenue level and the rate structure modification and the shift, it's going to just pile on something.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So having said that, I wanted to mention some of the rate structure refinements that I'm thinking of. On water, we talked about single family. I think across the board, I'm recommending you eliminate the seasonal differential. Just have one set of block rates that apply the entire year. We've looked at keeping a 4-block structure and then also going down to a 3-block structure. And also potentially recalibrating it based on the water demand patterns. So maybe the first block would be to 6 CCF per month based on winter averages instead of 10. And then maybe summer average would be the basis for the second block versus just kind of saying 10, 20, 30. So there can be refinement, and we can talk more about that when I come back with rate structure alternatives.
Did you any scenarios where you charge a lot less for the charge, right?
I could. So part of what I want to do is get a sense of what you want to see. I have not materially shifted between base and consumption. What I've done so far. So multifamily, I think as we looked at their demand patterns, they hardly peak at all, and the tenants don't see the water bill, generally speaking. So the blocks don't make sense. So basically, trying to go to just a uniform volume rate for all usage for multifamily. And then the base rate would stay where it's at. Commercial, eliminating the blocks, because again, commercial tenants often don't see the bill, and just going to a seasonal volume rate, updating the differential. And then for irrigation, also eliminating the seasonal differential because they're mostly the opposite reason for multifamily. and just move to a uniform volume rate per CCF for irrigation. Any feedback on that? Anything else you'd want to see? Do you actually want to see a reduced base rate scenario?
Irrigation. Because my understanding, our base rate includes 0 water.
Yes, and it doesn't have to.
Because we have the problem where we have, snowbirds in town.
Yeah.
Water.
So the challenge there is you have to maintain the system around you. And if you don't recover it from them, everybody else is paying.
Yep.
So, but yeah, we can certainly look at that.
I mean, the other thing is if you did lower the base rate and certainly it went from 10 to 7 BCFs, that might offset, or also looking at went from 10 to 12, what that loss might be in revenue, but what it would move the citizens in those that don't cap out over 10, but less than 12 at that other rate. I mean, that's about $7 a month. That those two have.
And potentially trying to adjust that to minimize the increase to a low user.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I'd like to see it under 10, or going to 7, and then maybe going to 12 as well to see what that does.
Because what I was doing based on the usage data, I was coming up with 6 and 13, but it was roughly.
Oh, okay.
The same order.
Yeah, most of the other cities around here were 7.
Average rate.
7 is
15 every other month, so yeah, 7.5.
Yeah.
From what financing said.
Now, I was basing 6 CCF on winter average usage, and then 13 CCF based on summer average. So the way you say it is like block 1 is sort of basic indoor lifeline use. Block 2 is indoor and outdoor use.
Okay.
So that, I mean, the simplest thing would be just have 3 blocks, 1, 2, and anything above the summer average. 13 gets that third block.
But one thing you did discuss on here, and I'm assuming is equivalent, is the out of city increases. Would that be the same?
So and actually, what I am inclined to do right now, it doesn't seem like there's a fixed multiplier that applies to outside city. I'm thinking for simplicity and consistency with what other communities do, just saying it's roughly 1.45, 1.46. Just say outside city rates are 1.5 times inside city rates.
We triple it and then actually lower our 7% to the residents?
I would say no, because the city of Spokane is actually in the middle of a trial having their multiplier challenged. And so I would say don't jump out at something that would differentiate you from what other communities. 1.25 to 1.5 are most common.
Okay, now how much more do we have?
I'm just getting final input from what I come back with.
Okay. If we could, so that we can keep the meeting moving along, any questions that you have right now, could we direct it to Ms. Ryerson, who can then direct it to Ms. Gonzalez, so to give you time to think about it? We can get it in email form.
Well, I had a
that way.
question that the council, I think, not for them, it's for us, because asking for input. I guess my question then is multifamily, us looking at a potential uniform volume rate. It seems like, is that not something that we would consider for single families?
You
to have a uniform volume rate, because I think it's the shock of the bills, because the constant changes.
Yeah, I would say so. For single family, first of all, they tend to peak a lot more than multifamily does, because they do like lawn watering, car washing, and all the other things. Multifamily, if they have irrigation meters, they're often separately and sort of targeted to the irrigation rate. Single family, the block rates encourage conservation because, otherwise you're going to have them using a ton of water and consuming your capacity, and then you're going to have to invest in expanding that capacity. So the purpose of the block rate, and not to mention the Department of Health, the water use efficiency rule says that you should be evaluating conservation-oriented rates, which you currently have.
Okay.
And so going to a uniform rate, I think, contrary to that, you might have some opinions from the Department of Health if you did that, at least with your next water system plan.
While I agree behind the tiered rate is for conservation, really all it does is piss people off. Bottom line, because I watered my lawn in the winter at the same amount for no apparent reason as I do in the summer. I'm going to be paying more.
Yeah.
And the problem is there's water sitting around in winter and not in summer.
Well,
Right.
That's not their concern. Yeah.
Never.
So this is a good question. So most of the costs are fixed. Most of the costs are, we have employees to run the system, we have infrastructure to maintain. I would say upwards at least 85-90% of the utilities' annual costs are fixed. And so if there might be a modest decrease in, like, say, electricity for pumping or something like that, but the purpose, and that's why the base rate doesn't recover anywhere near 85 to 90% of the cost. And in most cases, most utilities, it doesn't, because they need to promote conservation. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a cost to justify.
So conservation, water by not.
Well, the problem is she's conserving at a time when there's plenty of water. So in the summer, demand is much higher, and it constrains the capacity of the system. No. What I'm saying is when she leaves, and the fact that she uses less water in the winter doesn't really benefit the utility. What benefits is reducing the peak demand during the summer months, because the system it's sized to meet that peak demand. And so if you have everybody dumping water on their lawns because of HOA rules or anything, this pushes it up, and then the city has to expand capacity.
With her bill, she gets a minimum of 10 CCFs.
No. For water, no. For water, there's a base charge, and then there's a block 1 rate that applies to usage up to 10 CCF.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. But you can't avoid that, though.
You can avoid everything but the base.
Yeah.
120 some odd dollars.
You're paying for water when you're not here if you're a snowbird.
The maintenance, all that maintenance.
There are other cities
Right.
that allow you to put your water on vacation. You have to completely turn it off, then you have no charges. And I think that would be something that would be great if we could look into that.
And like Mr. Gonzalez was just saying, if you do that, then the other residents are going to be paying a higher base rate, because the main thought you need to think of is, if we need $10 million a year, we need $10 million a year, regardless of how we get it. So if we're going to reduce hers, then we're going to raise yours. Does that make sense?
Am I right?
Well, there's a difference between socialism and social contract theory, which is what we're talking about.
I think we're at a place that we can round this up for tonight.
Yeah,
Questions, obviously. You can we need to have more discussions, as you said.
Absolutely. This was just an initial presentation. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And it was very thorough.
And I apologize for sort of going in knowing terms that aren't necessarily universal. I do this every day.
No, I believe you.
Thank you for your time.
I understand that, knowing Ms. Roberts. All right, let's move on. Okay, now we move to council open discussion. Let's
shut your mouth, Tom.
Yes, let's keep in mind what we have just had.
One thing real quick.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember
With
Watt.
the CFF on November 3rd.
Yeah.
That's a lot of great stuff. I have here for you to pass around is Beyond the Borders. They're expanding our system. They're up here at Walmart every day, Monday through Friday. Well, I'm taking the Sumner from the city. They also have care for seniors and people that need to go to, like, for kidney specialists down there. They'll drop off a stay for them and wait for them to get out of the facility. So you don't have to get a taxi or Uber or something, which is a wrong for a lot of people.
What did you call that? Beyond Borders or
Beyond the Borders?
Beyond the Borders.
Yep. Dial 211 covers all seniors, low income, youth 12 to 17, and disabled individuals.
Right.
So they're all over town for us, doing more. They're trying to expand to a regular route for us. So it's really exciting. So Another grant he's working on. So
Is that similar to the Mom and Me, the bus that used to go around and
well, that was private.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
Is that still in existence? You know?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Councilmember
Welcome.
Watson. Any comments or discussion? Okay, Councilmember Swami.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, for clarification, is that COLA thing on next week?
Yes, it's on the consent agenda for November 22nd.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering because I know we looked at that at finance and all, and full council hasn't seen that yet, but I think it still suggested from the administration is a 1.5% increase.
Correct.
Yeah.
For non-represented employees.
Yes, excellent. I would like to understand from the council why that is so low. I know that's the bizarrest argument you've ever seen from Councilmember Swamin, but it's my understanding that the federal government recognizes that strange times we're in with the 8+ % inflation rate that's looking out there, that the federal government has given the feds like an 8.7 COLA basically for Social Security recipients. So why would we be so low?
I personally don't know why the administration put that forward, but I do know that we do have a salary study that is scheduled to happen sometime soon. That would.
But that's the bookend stuff, right? Just to be quick
Why?
on this discussion, you're trying to figure out, your maintenance person, your non-salary, your whatever it is.
Yeah.
Position X, top, bottom. You're trying to figure that out. What does that have to do with the COLA thing? Right? Or
Maybe
wrong?
I
I
can-
don't know.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, that's just been generally that's been past practice is that we've followed COLAs for non-represented employees that are in keeping with those of the represented employees, as was pointed out in the agenda bill that you all see in next week's packet. AFSCME is settled at 2.5% for 2023, and the 3 police guilds are at 3%. So it was intended for more of internal equity.
Sure, yeah, but again, if you're going with that scenario for an argument, wouldn't you 2.5 to match the representative figure for 2023?
You certainly could.
I don't know. That's why I was throwing out.
It's a council decision at the end of the day.
No, again, it's a bizarre discussion for me, but I'll continue to make the assertion that our professional staff that the mayor maintains is the heart blood of the city and serving citizens.
Yeah.
And we those folks, and when you go to the store and you go to the gas station, we all know that pain out there that's not going to magically go away. Those costs are there. So unless we pony up with some more money, I think you're looking at employees that are not going to be satisfied. I think it's a burden upon us as a corporate entity to properly compensate our employees.
Well, do you think it should be a matter that we would take off the consent agenda for next week, Councilmember Swami, so we can discuss the matter?
At the very least, I would like to see a proposal from the administration for an increase in that. And I don't know what that is, and then we can discuss later on. I don't know what the mayor, his preference is to your city, right?
Yeah.
I'm just a legislative body to allocate funds.
And as far as the bill itself, do we have any minutes from the finance committee as to where we came up with that number? Or is this simply tradition that we have put this on?
It's generally our past practice.
Okay.
Pushed it forward for full council discussion.
I see. Oh, okay. So
We certainly, there's time
we're
to
here.
amend the agenda, and we can put it on full council next week.
Yeah.
Desire.
So yeah.
Okay.
Let the council think about it, and I'll be proposing an increase at that point in time. So there you go.
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Swami. Any further open discussion that we have? Councilmember Evans.
Before we use all the ARPA funds for the sewer and water, which I do think is necessary, I don't truly believe that was the intent of ARPA, but I do understand how necessary that is to help out. I think we should be able to build and create that system on our own without a government bailout. That being said, I would like to discuss taking $200,000 of that and setting it aside, earmarking it for projects at the senior center. So I'd like to have that as a discussion point upcoming to make sure that all the needs that we've kicked down the road for them over the last I've been here may actually get some of it addressed.
Could that include like expansion also? I know they have like a
Probably not for
courtyard
200,000,
outside.
but
Well,
it'd be up
yeah,
to the administration to figure out how to use it.
And that I can tell you, the administration actually brought that subject up to look at different alternatives today, and it would be nice to put that. How would you like to approach that, Councilmember? Put it on for full council discussion next week.
Well, I think the main point is not to allocate it towards utilities currently, right?
Right.
We're at 4.2 in ARPA right now.
Because of it.
0.5, but it's a discussion. Yeah, we can add to the future that back and come up with a recommendation.
I've always believed that ARPA was supposed to help the people, and yes, the sewer does help the people.
Sure.
But I don't, in my heart of hearts, believe that was the initial that. I believe it's supposed to go back to food banks and community things like that, and elected the senior center for so long that I'd like to do something for them.
What is our schedule through the rest of the year since we have additional? Yes. Do we have one more workshop that we can?
We have the December 3rd workshop.
Okay.
And then December 20th and 27th and January 3rd will all cancel.
And considering this is open discussion, would you want to put it on for the next workshop, or you want to put it on for next week?
Certainly can wait till next year.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. Yeah, because I'm, council member Evans and I have discussed also. I would be in favor of increasing more of the monies to go towards community programs as opposed to utilities. That's where the impact was on the community. By that impact with the ARPA funds to actually do things that are incredibly hard to do with, as you pointed out, with the senior center and stuff, the community center, different things, kind of a situation, as opposed to the utilities, which have a very fund source available. It's a very straightforward funding source if need be.
As we saw, $4 million takes off $12 1 year.
Exactly, and you can imagine what you could, a couple $1 million in senior center or what have you, right? You could make a significant impact over there when in reality, value being returned to the taxpayers. If you just simply throw it at sewer or water or storm, is $1 a month.
Also, could we do, because you had talked about the Victor Falls house and possibly turning that into the Historical Society. Does that need improvements as well in order for them to move in there?
Yeah, so currently we have a tenant in there, and I believe that individual is on an annual lease, so we would have to look at the lease. If we were to turn that house at Victor Falls into a public facility, there would be quite a number of improvements related to accessibility, ADA improvements, and things like that. I believe it's the president of the Gig Harbor Historical Society has had a tour of the Bonnie. Gosh, I keep saying Harbor. That's the fun one.
Oh, I did.
I said that without.
No, thank you, Councilmember. I was actually going to give Mr. Rodovich a lot of grief over that.
The president of the Historical Society the city has toured the triple wide modular that's up at Public Works. It seems like a suitable facility for them. So at least at this time, the plan would be that certainly prior to demolition of the old city hall, the Historical Society would temporarily or move into the triple wide modular that's up at the existing old Public Works facility.
And we would just leave it there rather than move it across.
Yes, the decision, we had a proposal to move it and also decided to leave it where it is.
Okay.
So at least at this point in time, that's the plan.
Okay, do we have anything further? Can we build a park with that? Some places have.
That I don't think we can do.
Okay. Not enough money. There are limitations on the money. But this is absolutely a discussion we need to have at the beginning of the year once you kind of figure out how much you're wanting to spend on utilities and then how much we have left over to spend. Then we can start talking about uses and what it can and can't be used for again.
No, and I'd just like to point out, I really like dumping the money into sewer and water because that affects almost every resident of the city, as opposed to otherwise we're picking and choosing groups in the city to favor.
But at every point, every citizen in this city will be a senior.
They may not go to the senior center. So,
well, and
they may not be here. But so that was I just wanted to point out that, you can guarantee you touch the largest part of the community through your water and sewer. Where if you do anything else, you're now looking at, what part of the community are you?
And I would argue you're touching the most vulnerable part of the city with putting funds towards the senior center. Yeah. There's impact, and then there's,
So
size.
you're choosing,
I mean, yeah, both
you're
both are
choosing to
valuable.
favor the
Yeah.
most vulnerable part of the community.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're favoring a part of your community, right? Young children are part of the community we can favor too.
Right.
Absolutely.
I would be fine spending all
And
$4
fun,
million on
fun
parks.
daycare for kids after school.
And which is the function of a city council, I believe, is to prioritize where the money goes without it completely egalitarian. But okay, anything further before we move on? All right. Seeing no other further open discussion, we have a review of council minutes. Councilmember Watson.
Made a couple corrections.
It's always a couple of corrections. Do we always have more than that?
No, it's always here one today, and she had 2 letters incorrect.
Right on.
180 documents.
No, they're very good, but we actually reduced what she has to put down for us for to help a lot.
And okay, now let's move on to our only discussion item of the night, the ad valorem public hearing. Council, do you have any questions or discussion on the matter?
Action, and I don't know if this requires the attorney or not, but the packet actually has your budget document in it and not your tax levy document.
Okay.
Discussion tonight.
Oh,
It does.
Yep.
Is that an,
We're actually discussing that.
You're not taking action, is that correct?
no? It's a discussion, but action is requested to be taken next.
There's no problem that the tax levy was in a prior packet, right?
Correct. It
If
wasn't.
it's a reprint mistake, I think it's fine. No action, and it's a regular council meeting. You could amend the agenda right now to add it. Wanted to.
Any motion?
It's on the agenda. Just wasn't.
Yeah, it's on the agenda, so I think.
Oh, okay.
Documentation.
Well, that sounds good.
And for clarification, Mr. Mayor, if I might, because there's definitely good questions, right, for the citizens. It's one of the weird things with the ad valorem is that property tax from the city.
Yes.
I'm not sure. Government will explain it a little bit weird because it's still my understanding. Basically, the rate goes down for each property owner, and yet the amount collected goes up.
Right.
Because there's growth associated with our city. So the value of the entire real estate portfolio of all the homes and businesses is growing, and you're only the total amount that the city can collect against all of that real estate. So if there's more value in all of that real estate, then each person pays a little bit less. So that's how that kind of works.
and that
Right.
value
So
is
there's
on
several
the county assessor.
Yeah, the assessed value. So essentially what the city's asking for is 1%, which is what we're allowed max, which equates to a little over $35,000.
Yeah. So and if we did nothing, we have to, doesn't it just remain the same?
No, if we did nothing, you would have no property tax.
Oh, yeah, that would be not appropriate.
I certainly appreciate the clarification.
This is why myself have received 2 emails from one citizen about it. I sent a reply back in today to her, so.
See, it's always two.
Always two.
All right. I believe that is all the business that we do have tonight. I want to thank everybody. This was a tough session tonight, and I believe everybody did put forward some very valid and very relevant questions tonight, and it's an issue that we're certainly going to visit in the future. So on that note, this meeting is adjourned.